Welcome, everybody. Our presentation today is approximately an hour and a half, and if you have questions during the presentation, I'm quite informal, so just give me a quick chat in the chat box or raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can ask your question directly. If I don't know the answer to your question, I'll try to find someone who can answer that question and I will get back to you electronically. I'll send you an email with that answer. So before we get moving, I want to just tell you a little bit about myself. I've been in clinical trials for a little over 10 years, and it's interesting to me that this particular presentation is quite germane for me because in my role in clinical trials, I have done a lot of training. I have provided job aids. I've worked on job tools and checklists and flow sheets, and we're going to talk about several of those. I have been working as a study coordinator in investigator-initiated trials. I worked as a CRA in a CRO company where I worked for major institutions, pharmaceutical companies, vaccine companies. I've also worked as a CRA for major vaccine company and pharmaceutical company directly as a CRA and a trial manager. And in many of those roles, I have completed a significant amount of training for the people in my organization as well as for people at clinical sites. One of the things that we do in this industry is we often are called upon to provide training to individuals either as a mentor type of a place or as a manager. So I hope that some of the concepts that we present here today with regards to tools for trainers as well as some of the examples that we've given you will be helpful in creating and you being able to create job aids. Have you ever developed a job aid before? I'm going to clear your emoticons here. Oh, thanks, Jerry. You already did that. Have you ever created a job aid, Amber, or have you had any experience with that, moderate experience, or you do it pretty regularly? Okay, so you have moderate experience in that. Great. Well, I'll look for your feedback on some of these things that we're going to be talking about. It'd be helpful to me, and if you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear it. The learning objectives for our presentation today include that you should be able to discuss the considerations for determining when a job aid is appropriate to incorporate into a training presentation and when it can stand alone to accomplish the desired training objective. Secondly, to identify strategies for using tools and checklists in training programs across various audiences and venues. And then lastly, to describe the elements of an effective job aid. One of the things that we mentioned right off the bat is, well, what is a job aid? And sometimes you'll find varying definitions about what a job aid is. We put up the definition that Alison Rosette created in her book, A Handbook for Job Aids. And she writes, a job aid is a repository for information, processes, or perspectives that is external to the individual and that supports work and activity by directing, guiding, and enlightening performances. And we can actually take each part of this definition and look at it a little more closely. If we look at repository for information, processes, or perspectives, those are the things that need to be considered as part of a job aid, the object in question. And whether it should be a poster, maybe it's a manual, a tape, some sort of a computer program, it has to be able to store and make accessible the information, those processes or perspectives on which effective human work and activity are based. If we talk about external to the individual, job aids get their identities in part by sharing separate from the individual. So the job aids are found in a lot of different places, and no matter where you've worked, I'm sure you've walked into different places and you've seen them tacked onto the walls next to their chair. Sometimes you see them taped onto their computer screens. Sometimes you see them in the inside of their drawers, little tips for them. Or sometimes you see them as coasters for their coffee. But because job aids are separate and can be relied on when the need arises, the individuals aren't forced to rely on things from memory. And this is an industry where we are bombarded with a lot of information, most of them regulations and guidelines. And so we're going to look at how some of those things, many of those elements, we create job aids for. For example, SAE reporting requirements. If you have a job aid for that, you might want to have the number for the clinical site to call or to fax the initial report. The time requirements for reporting, which of course then would encompass some of the regulations. And then some essential information that needs to be included on that initial report. if we look at that other aspect about supports, work, and activity, JobAids can play a role in all kinds of endeavors that we have within this industry. And to know when and to how and what people are often turned to some documentations or guidelines or checklists, things like protocols or references. These tools help people actually do their job and do their job better by providing access to that information, perspectives, procedures, and policies. In a setting as diverse as ours, it's important to be able to have that information readily available so that they can execute it and do their job better.